Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime.
Hey everyone, Craig Baird here. Before I begin today's story, I want to take a moment and ask that you check me out on Patreon at www.patreon.com/CanadaEHX. There are several tiers with great benefits, from ad-free content to t-shirts and other cool stuff. And don't forget you can also donate directly to the show at www.canadaehx.com. Just click donate. It helps keep this show going. Okay, on with the show.
February 5th, 1981 was a cold Thursday night in Toronto. The Toronto Maple Leafs continued their plunge into a disappointing year as they lost their third game in a row. And as they struggled on the ice, it was glitz and glamour just over 2 kilometers away at the O'Keefe Centre. On hand for the Juno Awards was Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who saw Anne Murray and Bruce Cockburn pick up 2 awards each. Meanwhile, along Yonge Street at 4 popular bathhouses, hundreds of gay men danced and socialized, free of the stigma they felt on the outside. But among the dancers and revelers, there were some with a different mission. At 11 p.m., 150 police officers stormed the buildings in a sweeping raid. The arrests were based in bigotry, but they inspired protests that have evolved into one of the largest pride festivals in the world. I'm Craig Baird, this is Canadian History X, and today I'm sharing the story behind Operation Soap. When Governor General Roland Michener gave royal assent to the Criminal Law Amendment Act of June 27, 1969, people cheered and said Canada had become a more progressive country. Justice Minister John Turner stated that the act was the most important and all-embracing reform to criminal and penal law ever attempted at one time. It legalized the sale of contraceptives and brought in new offenses related to misleading advertising, harassing phone calls, and cruelty to animals. But no one remembers that, because the act was supposed to bring about the legalization of abortion and the decriminalization of homosexuality. But did it really? While the Canadian government patted itself on the back and called itself progressive, the changes to abortion and homosexuality laws were superficial at best. It was an attempt to appease those who wanted change without angering others who wanted everything to remain the same. Abortions were legal, but getting one was next to impossible. A woman had to go through a therapeutic abortion committee of 3 male doctors, and the abortion would only be approved if it endangered the woman. It wasn't until 1988 that the liberalization of the abortion law came about thanks to the Supreme Court case R.V. Morgentaler. You can learn more about that landmark event in my episode from 2023. Now, homosexuality was decriminalized, but again, there's more to that story. Between 1968 and 1969, Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau sparked a controversy surrounding the Liberal government's passage of Bill C-150.
There's no place for the state in the bedrooms of the nation, and I think that, what's done in private between adults doesn't concern the criminal code.
Consensual same-sex relationships were legal, yes, but it came with strings attached. Parties had to be over 21, and relationships had to happen in private homes and could only be between 2 people. A law from 1892 made gross indecency between men illegal, meaning any same-sex attraction, which included touching, dancing, and kissing, was illegal. That law had been made gender-neutral in 1953. Now, Bill C-150 made acts legal, but under special circumstances, otherwise you were still breaking the law. And before the decriminalization of homosexuality, Everett Clippert was arrested and charged with gross indecency for having consensual sex with other men. His court case led to this change in laws. But as the government applauded their progress, Clippert sat in jail. It wasn't until 1971, 2 years after the law changed and 4 years after he was jailed, that Clippert was released. Was he pardoned? No. In the eyes of the law, he remained a former criminal. The change never helped him, and it wasn't until 2020 before he was pardoned 24 years after his death. Meanwhile, people outed as gay could still lose their jobs or be vilified in the community, so the laws didn't do much other than make it easier for police to arrest same-sex couples in public. This effectively forced gay people to stay in the closet. The changes to the law left a lot of gray area in decriminalization, and those that opposed homosexuality made full use of it. In the 1970s, Toronto was at the forefront of the fight for LGBTQ rights in Canada, and it seemed that barriers were being broken annually. On Church Street, the Glad Day bookshop opened in December 1970, and it had a massive impact on the gay rights movement going forward. Gerald Moldenhauer's shop was the first LGBTQ bookstore in Canada, and a year and a half later, on June 12, 1971, he and several others founded the Toronto Gay Action Group. 2 months later, they marched in the We Demand rally on Parliament Hill, calling for equal rights for the gay community. I covered that in my episode last week, so be sure to have a listen. On November 1st of that same year at Glad Day, the Body Politic launched. It was Canada's first significant gay publication, and for the next 16 years it was at the forefront of publicizing the fight for equality for gay Canadians, and all those actions led to some progress. In February 1972, Peter Maloney heard about a petition to prevent homosexual activists from addressing students in Toronto high schools. So, he came out as gay at a Liberal Party policy conference and became Canada's first openly gay political candidate when he ran in the Ontario provincial election. But there were also drawbacks. On January 5, 1974, 4 women, Adriana Rosen, formerly Adrian Potts, Pat Murphy, Sue Wells, and Lamar Van Dyke, formerly Heather Elizabeth Nelson, were thrown out of a Toronto bar. They became known as the Brunswick Four, and their expulsion and eventual detention led to charges. In response to their treatment by the bar staff and the police, they launched a landmark court case and in the process, raised awareness about homophobia and harassment at the hands of the Toronto Police Department. And it seemed like the police force targeted the gay community and attempted to stifle the growing LGBTQ rights movement. It became a repeating theme over the next decade. The police force and the powers that be used the force at its disposal to slow down progress. The criminal code outlawed same-sex relationships outside the privacy of the home, which made bathhouses frequent targets for raids by the force. And each time a bathhouse was raided, the names and addresses of those arrested were published in the newspapers. Jobs were lost, marriages failed, and friendships collapsed. And these raids weren't just happening in Toronto. In May 1976, raids of bathhouses were conducted in Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa as part of a nationwide effort by police forces leading up to the Summer Olympics. And this wouldn't be the last time police used force to oppress the gay community. In 1977, police raided the offices of the Body Politic to seize a subscription list of the magazine so they could target gay men. And that raid sparked protests around North America. In San Francisco, gay activist Harvey Milk protested outside the Canadian consulate. Yet, the raids continued. On October 22, 1977, Montreal police raided Trucks Cruising Bar and arrested 8 people with gross indecency and another 145 people as found-ins in a common body house. This led to a protest by 1,000 people 2 days later, and there seemed to be no end to the raids, and things were about to get worse. Aside from the near-constant raids, Toronto did have problems. Crime was high and residents complained about Yonge Street because they saw it as a destination for sex work, strip clubs, and adult stores. Locals and tourists alike avoided the area, but others had no choice but to work there, and that came with an element of danger. Emmanuel Jacques was a 12-year-old boy who immigrated from the Azores with his family years earlier, and to help provide for his family, he operated a shoeshine stand on Yonge Street. On July 28, 1977, he was lured to an apartment above a massage parlor with a promise of earning $35 to move photographic equipment. And what happened next was graphic and violent. Once inside, Jacques was restrained and assaulted for 12 hours. Then he was drowned in a kitchen sink. 4 men were arrested for the murder, 3 of whom worked as doormen at the massage parlor. And the murder sparked outrage in Toronto and across Canada. Several protests and marches were held demanding that Yonge Street be cleaned up. Telegrams were sent to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau asking him to reinstate the death penalty for the 4 men. And in response, high-ranking police officer Peter Ackroyd was tasked by the city to crack down on what they felt were unsavory businesses. And chief among their targets were adult stores, strip houses, and gay bathhouses. But even shoeshine stand operators were told to pack up and leave. There was also an economic reason for the crackdown. Eaton Center had just opened at 220 Yonge Street, and city officials worried that the area's reputation would be bad for business. And over the next few months, the police presence increased. Raids became commonplace, and any gay man who went to a bathhouse was in danger of being arrested for gross indecency or found-ins in the common body house. In an episode of our sister podcast, Global News Is What Happened To, Tom Hooper, a historian and sessional assistant professor in the Department of Equity Studies at York University, who spent years studying the bathhouse raids in the late 70s and early 80s, told then Global News reporter Erica Villa that 20 police officers raided the barracks bathhouse and several dozen men were arrested on December 8, 1978.
And this was a significant attack. This was a significant escalation. Whereas the raids previously, the number of arrests were quite limited. This was larger than that. And so the community responded with protest. In the aftermath of the protest, many of the activists were thinking, okay, what do we do now? We held this protest, we got this media coverage, now what? They decided, well, we have to fight this in court. We have to support the men who were charged in the bathhouse. We have to raise money. We have to find gay-friendly lawyers who will take up their cause and will convince them all to plead not guilty. And if we can do that, then we can mount some sort of community resistance against the bathhouse raids. And so that's exactly what those activists did. They formed this group. Initially, it was called the December 9 Defense Fund. Doesn't really roll off the tongue, and it doesn't really have any kind of political impact. So a few months later, they changed the name of the group to something that spoke to their cause, which was the Right to Privacy Committee, and that this group was going to fight back against police harassment of gay men and other queers.
The Right to Privacy Committee became one of the city's largest and most active advocacy groups during this time, and would play a very important role in just a few years because, unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last raid. But thankfully, not everyone was in favor of the crackdowns. When longtime Toronto Mayor David Crombie left municipal politics in 1978 for the House of Commons, it opened up the mayor's seat in the city. 3 aldermen, David Smith, Tony O'Donoghue, and John Sewell, put their names forward. And while O'Donoghue and Smith were well known for their connections to developers and their right-leaning politics, Sewell was the opposite. First elected to Toronto City Council in 1969, he was known as a community activist and labeled a radical by his opponents. He worked with residents of Treffin Court on the north side of Queen Street between Parliament Street and River Street to fight against developers who wanted to level the neighborhood, and no one gave him much of a shot of winning the mayoral election. But on November 13, 1978, right-leaning and pro-business supporters couldn't decide between O'Donoghue and Smith, and they split the vote while everyone else voted for Sewell, and he was elected as mayor of Toronto with just 38% of the vote. The media quickly labeled him as Mayor Blue Jeans for his habit of wearing denim to city council meetings. And when he entered office, he criticized the Toronto police and demanded they be more accountable to the public. He was also a major supporter of LGBTQ rights. Sewell condemned the raids on bathhouses in the press, as well as the attack on the body politic. And while the mayor was ahead of his time, Toronto overall was still conservative-leaning. In the November 10, 1980 election, Sewell lost the mayor's seat to Art Eggleton. And around the same time, Peter Ackroyd became the chief of police. And with Eggleton as mayor of Toronto, there was a rollback to the progress made by the LGBTQ community in the city. And 66 days after the municipal election, Operation Soap began. On the night of February 5, 1981, the 4 most popular bathhouses along Yonge Street, Club Baths, Romans 2 Health and Recreation Spa, Richmond Street Health Emporium, and the Barracks were busy. The music was jumping as folks socialized. Club Baths was the most popular as it was part of a chain of dozens of bathhouses in North America that had over 500,000 members across the continent. Unbeknownst to the revelers inside, police officers gathered outside waiting. Coordinating through radio, 150 police officers readied themselves for the signal to begin. And inside the bathhouses, undercover officers wore red dots on their clothing to identify them. One officer stated it was to, quote, know who were the straights. At 11 p.m., the doors to the bathhouses burst open as police swarmed, Officers shouted, grabbed men, and put them in handcuffs. Each of those arrested were led outside into the cold Toronto night to waiting paddy wagons to be transported to jail. Several men were lined up along a shower wall, and an officer allegedly told them that he wished the water pipes were hooked up to gas so he could kill them all. It was a clear reference to the Nazi death camps of the Holocaust. Ron Rosenese told then Global News reporter Erica Vella on an episode of the podcast What Happened To that he grew up in Ottawa, and in his 20s he moved to Toronto and often visited the bathhouses in the city. On February 5th, 1981, Ron visited the Roman baths with his cousin.
Well, the night began as, it usually does at the bathhouse with me arriving and, as was my habit at the time, renting a room. I had little desire to park my clothes in a locker and then have no place where I could actually rest or find refuge or even invite somebody to my room or, be comfortable within the bathhouse. So I rented a room. I took a walk around. I greeted some people I knew because it was actually quite a social environment. And a lot of the same guys would frequent the bathhouse, particularly the Romans too. And so there were lots of guys to whom I, said hello. I think that one of the things that we all sort of dealt with was the challenge of meeting new people on this rather familiar territory. But I think we most importantly viewed it as safe space where we could enjoy ourselves.
Ron said he was sitting alone when he heard unexpectedly loud noises.
I'm not sure where my cousin was at that moment, but eventually there was pounding on the doors. I opened the door to face a police officer who basically said, "Get dressed and come to the front." As I recall, I was given a few minutes to grab my clothes. Met my cousin in the front hallway, but we were pretty roughly rounded up by the police, and they were, calling us dirty faggots and generally handling us very roughly. It was shocking to me. It was like my first ever encounter with the state and police. My heart was racing, and I remember kind of holding my cousin close to me, and I remember saying to him later, jokingly, "No, we're family. You can't separate us." It's all a bit of a blur, but everybody was gathered together, and then we were processed finally at one of the local police division.
Ron was one of 306 men who were arrested that night. He was charged with found in a common bawdy house. This means he was found in a place that was being used for the purpose of prostitution or other acts of indecency. Now, the vagueness of the law allowed it to be applied to anything that offended current moral standards of decency when it came to sex. Tim McCaskill, a columnist for Body Politic at the time, raced to the scene where he heard about the raids. He said of the police, "They looked like a pride of lions that had just killed an antelope. They were standing around very pleased with themselves and didn't pay any attention to the people outside because they already had their prey inside." That night, hundreds of men were arrested across Toronto, and many were wearing only towels as police led them to jail. At the time, it was the largest arrest in Toronto's history and the largest mass arrest in Canadian history. It was not exceeded until the mayhem of the Stanley Cup playoff riots in Edmonton in 2006. And while there were claims by police that the arrests were over prostitution, not a single incident of sex work was ever uncovered. Now, each man was forced to give their names, the names of their superiors at work, and if the person was married, their wife's name. Police sometimes called workplaces as quote-unquote concerned citizens to tell people about the sexual orientation of an employee. Notices were later sent to the arrested men's homes recommended they be tested for venereal disease. This was another tactic to expose gay men to their family and friends. So many complaints came into the Toronto Public Health Department because of the policy after Operation Soap that they simply removed it completely. And each of the bathhouses were heavily damaged by police. The Richmond suffered the most and never opened again. Dennis Finlay is a community activist, and he told then Global News reporter Erica Vela on the What Happened To podcast that he recalled news of the raids spreading quickly.
I do know my emotion was utter rage, just furious that this would even be considered to have happened within our community. Those bathhouses were safe spaces, safe places for us to go and meet other individuals. And the fact that they had been attacked and damaged and destroyed by the police in their attack on the community. They literally went in with sledgehammers and bolt cutters, and they smashed doors when people were standing there saying, "I've got the key to this door. I'll let you in." And they went, "Fuck the key." And they pulled out their sledgehammers and they smashed property. They did physical damage to the property. And that physical damage was like physical damage to people. That was physical damage to our psyche.
They were also furious that police were attempting to shame the queer community.
Now, there's always been the theory that the bathhouse raids were as a result of the police being instructed or informed, or maybe it was on their own behalf, that they were going to put a lid on us. They were going to shut us down. They were going to try and push us back into our closets. And the best way for them to attack us was through what they saw was the most vulnerable part of ourselves, our sex lives. Well, I'm sorry, they bet on the wrong pony, because the community was just furious.
Within hours, people mobilized and a protest was organized. Attorney General of Ontario, Rory McCurdy, became the focus of blame because he would have had to approve the raids for them to take place. Several years later, he stated that he expressed his concern to Chief Ackroyd and believed such raids risked the city devolving into a police state. He said, "The whole thing looked terrible. Without a doubt, this was one of my most frustrating experiences." Chief Ackroyd stated he was enforcing criminal code violations, which was technically true. He said, "As chief, I have no other course of action but to go along with the direction of the Crown Attorney." Mayor Eggleton told the press he had no knowledge that the raids were going to take place. And to the people of Toronto, it didn't matter who was to blame. They were angry, and they were about to let everybody know it. Community organizer Dennis Finlay told Erica Vela he was on the front lines handing out flyers informing people of the demonstration.
There were going to be 20 people at the corner or more. But as the time went on and as midnight struck, the intersection filled. We blocked the street. We closed off Yonge Street. Cars could not get up and down Yonge Street anymore. And ultimately, there was like 3,000 people showed up on 24 hours notice, less than 24 hours notice, because there was such a realization that the police and the state had overstepped their grounds. Straight people came out in support of us. And so this great swelling of people coming out and standing in the streets and marching down and going down Yonge Street to Dundas, then over to in front of 52 Division and screaming our lungs out, "Fuck you, 52. I'm sorry, we are not going back into the closet. You have done wrong." And then some of those people went back up to the legislative buildings that very night and pummeled the doors.
Dennis says that this was a defining moment. As they marched down Dundas Street, a group of counter-protesters yelled homophobic slurs and tried to block them. And when a human barricade of 200 officers blocked the protesters from the police station, they simply headed towards Queen's Park. Police arrested 11 people, a police car was damaged, and there were 4 smashed windows in a streetcar. But the protest wasn't just about the police raids on the bathhouses. It was years of pent-up anger at having to hide from society. Ken Popert, a writer with Body Politics, said, "I know that something got into people because it got into me. What got into me was my own anger over living in a society which finds my existence inconvenient. What got into me was my own anger over harassment on streets that are never safe for me." Others found different ways to express their anger. Brent Hawkes, the senior pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church of Toronto, accepted the LGBT community and was outraged by the raids, so he began a hunger strike on February 16th. Meanwhile, Chum Radio criticized the police for what they termed brutality, while a column in the Globe and Mail called the raids hypocritical and a danger to other communities in the city. The Toronto Star, however, refused to condemn the raids or reverse its policy of printing the names of those arrested. And meanwhile, the outrage continued. On February 20th, 4,000 protesters marched from Queen's Park to Toronto Police 52 Division, once again leading to an angry confrontation with police. 2 weeks later, the protest continued with a gay freedom rally on March 6. Considered to be the first Pride event in Toronto's history, speakers who attended and denounced the raids included Margaret Atwood and Member of Parliament Sven Robinson. 8 years later, Robinson became the first openly gay Member of Parliament. And on March 12th, Hawkes agreed to end his hunger strike after 25 days when Toronto City Council appointed a race relations advisor to investigate the raids. And the city appointed Daniel Hill, who was tasked with looking at the larger issue of police relations with the LGBTQ community. But Hill declined the appointment, so Arnold Brunner took over and began his investigation on July 13th. Meanwhile, with 306 people charged in the bathhouse raids, the cases clogged up the courts at Old City Hall. Dennis told then Global News reporter Erica Vella on her podcast What Happened To that the courts were displeased by the raids.
The judges were really furious, the fact that so much time was being taken up by these absolutely useless nonsense cases that the court system literally moved the cases out to Scarborough. And now we were down to the situation where I was all of a sudden beginning to see that there were people who didn't have lawyers and we were going to trial. And the first time that this happened, I didn't know what to do. I was a deer in the headlights. I was just shocked. And anyway, this person came in, his name was Red, he pled guilty, and I was devastated. I was just cut to the core.
Finley said that lawyers and community organizers came up with an idea of how to defend those arrested.
You stay quiet, you sit down, you do not do anything that draws any attention to you. I will ask the officer who arrested you to be sent out of the court so he cannot see you when you're arraigned. So then the judge is going to call your name again. Once the cop is out, you're going to stand up. The clerk is going to read the charges against you. You're going to sit down. The cop is going to come back in. The very first thing that I'm going to request, that seeing as identity is one of the issues that has been determined by case law, and I can wave the piece of paper, and if he can't identify you, then the case is thrown out. Yay. So we did it. And I did 12 of those cases in that format. And I won all 12 of them.
Dennis said the Right to Privacy Committee worked to pack the courtroom with people who resembled the accused so officers would have a harder time identifying the men facing charges.
And in most cases, they couldn't actually recognize the individual because they processed numbers of them.
It took 4 years for the cases to be heard, and Dennis told Erica Vella they were able to successfully defend about 87% of those cases. And as for Pastor Hawkes, well, he wasn't done with LGBTQ activism. On January 14th, 2001, he officiated a wedding between two same-sex couples at his church. This led to a court challenge that made Ontario the first province and only the third jurisdiction in the world to legalize same-sex marriage. The Toronto bath raids caused public outrage and thrusted gay rights into the spotlight, but they weren't the only ones. Across Canada, police continued to target them. On May 30th, raids took place in Edmonton. 2 weeks later, Toronto police raided Backdoor Gym and Sauna and International Steam Baths. Those raids led to another 21 men being arrested, which led to more protests. On September 24th, Arnold Brunner's report, Out of the Closets, Study Relations Between Homosexual Community and Police, was released. And this landmark report recognized the gay community as a legitimate community in the city. It also called for a dialogue committee to be established between the gay community and Toronto police. But what happened in the years to come? Despite all the anger and protests, the raids did not stop. Toronto police conducted raids in April 1983, February 1996, and September 2000. However, no matter how hard they tried, LGBTQ rights progressed thanks to the relentless work by the community, and homophobia became less acceptable in Canada. In Toronto, what had started with a protest over Operation Soap evolved into one of the largest gay pride parades in the world. Today, over 100,000 people take part in the parade, and another 1 million are part of the Pride Week celebrations. In 2005, Toronto Police Chief Bill Blair became the first chief of police in Toronto's history to march in the parade. But in June 2016, more than 35 years after Operation Soap, then Police Chief Mark Saunders spoke to a packed house.
The 35th anniversary of the 1981 raids is a time when the Toronto Police Service expresses its regret for those very actions. It is also an occasion to acknowledge the lessons learned about the risks of treating any part of Toronto's many communities as not fully a part of society.
Historian and professor Tom Hooper told then Global News reporter Erica Vella for her podcast What Happened To that he was at the Toronto Police headquarters that day, but left feeling disappointed.
It's not really an apology. It was an expression of regret, and a vague expression of regret at that. Usually with an apology, there should be some sort of, maybe releasing some of the documents that are involved, revealing some of the reasons behind it, really sort of trying to articulate some of the problems that went on that they're trying to fix and address. None of that was really part of it. So to me, it felt very political.
You might remember that at the time, there was also a debate over police involvement in Toronto Pride at the same time as Black Lives Matter was invited to not only join, but lead the parade. However, Justin Trudeau did march in that year's Pride Parade and became the first sitting Prime Minister to do so. In November 2017, less than a year later, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau issued a formal apology to the LGBTQ Two-Spirit community in the House of Commons. Then, less than a year later, officials introduced Bill C-75 to amend the Criminal Code, the Youth Justice System Act, as well as other acts. The Body House law was officially repealed, and in March 2023, the former Minister of Public Safety, Marco Mendocino, said those who were convicted could now apply to get their records expunged.
The Expungement of Historically Unjust Convictions Act was introduced and passed into law in June of 2018. And by doing so, the government created a path for the permanent erasing of criminal records related to historical injustices. And that is why today we are able to be here to announce yet another step towards righting past wrongs that were related to the way in which our justice system worked, and to further protect human rights. And so today, I am very pleased to announce that the Government of Canada will enable convictions under the Criminal Code for body house and indecency-based offenses to be eligible for expungement.
As for Roy McCurdy, the Attorney General many blamed for authorizing Operation Soap, he actually went on to have a part in helping the LGBTQ community. The same year as Operation Soap, McCurdy played a critical role in brokering a deal that led to the creation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the Charter became an important tool in the fight for equality for the gay community. And in 2003, when the Court of Appeal used the Charter to justify the right for same-sex couples to marry, the man who wrote the history-changing decision was Roy McCurdy. A special thanks goes out to Erica Vella for her work on the Toronto bathhouse raids for the podcast Global News' What Happened To. A link to her full episode will be included within my show notes. And I hope you enjoyed that episode and our look at Operation Soap. This show is researched, produced, and written by me, Craig Baird, with the help of Dila Velasquez. Audio production and design by Rosalind Kufor. If this is your first time listening and you like what you heard, please take a moment and give us a 5-star review to help other people find these amazing stories. And there are so many for you to sink your teeth into. If you enjoy this podcast, then please check out my other podcasts, From John to Justin, Canada, A Yearly Journey, Pucks and Cups, and Canada's Great War. We love hearing from you, so if you have a show topic you want me to cover, email me at craig@canadaehx.com. or stop by my website and social media. I'll include all of those in my show notes. Until next time, I'm Craig Baird, and this is Canadian History X.